Good afternoon and welcome to today's edition of As You See Yourselves. Today I'm joined by a very interesting fella who comes from Denmark, has written a number of books. We have one here, The Deprived, which talks about innocent people on death row in America. But his whole life story is fascinating and I want to hear it from him. Steffen who? Steffen, good to have you here in London again.
Thank you very much for having me.
That's all right. You were only in London a couple of weeks back.
Yeah. I did a talk at the London Press Club, which I really enjoyed.
Good.
And actually, I was being interviewed by you.
Yes, you
and
were.
I guess that if I dare to come back, that must have been, going very well.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have you here. Let's talk about your childhood, because I've read the story of how you became what you are today. But what was your childhood like in Denmark?
I had a great childhood, very safe. I was the youngest of two siblings. My sister's 12 years older than me, and my brother roughly...
12 years is a long time.
Yeah, but that meant, she was having spare time jobs after school.
Right.
Cashing in from, working at the local bakery and so on, which meant that at an early stage in my life, I was actually being provided for by my sister as well. So, I had both my parents, buying toys and stuff for me, and now also my sister. And that is the advantage of, having a sister that's 12 years older.
12 years older.
Yeah. No, but I had a great childhood. I think that my parents, they were very protective in the way that they taught me right from wrong. But
that's good, but they weren't protected. They were letting you experience things and learn, and as we've said in England for years, learn by our mistakes.
That as well, but my point is, because they were teaching me right from wrong, and they had practiced on two older siblings, I had all the advantages and the benefits.
So third time lucky.
Exactly. And I remember that they knew that I was not going to run off or get into some kind of trouble. So when we went to Paris on a vacation, I think I must have been like 12 years old, they let me walk around the streets of Paris on my own. And when I was 17 years old, still living with my parents back home, they let me spend an entire summer in the States during my school break. So I went as only 17 years old.
At 17, I can understand that, but 12 years old, when was that?
When I was 12 years old?
Yeah.
That must have been in 87.
87?
Yeah. But if anyone asked, tell them that it was like 97.
Right, okay, yeah. Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm only 12. I only admit to being over 12 when I want to go to a pub. I've never grown up and have no intention of doing so. But I think back to the streets of London. I was born not long after the war, where you wouldn't let a kid do today what we let a kid do then. But would you let Sophia go wandering off in 5 years' time-ish when she's about 12?
Absolutely not.
Right.
And when she's 17, she's not traveling.
She's
to
not
the
going
States.
either.
No. We can talk about when she gets to 27, and then she has probably talked me around to it when she's 37. So
right. Do you think she'll run with that?
No.
So you had this lovely childhood. Was it a rural childhood or a city childhood?
It was in the suburbs.
Right.
But I went and I played football 3-4 times a week. I did a lot of sports, and it was a safe neighborhood. So you would just run out into the streets, play football, whatever you want to do with your friends living a bit further down the street and so on. And also, what I remember the best, or not the best, but which was a huge part of my childhood and who I've become, was the fact that our mornings always started the same way. If my parents, they would get out of bed and be up for like 6 or 7 in the morning, the first thing they did was turning on the radio, listening to what had happened since I went to bed around the world. And we would have like, which is
so
very
literally
rare today.
around the world, not just Danish current
No,
affairs.
everything,
Everything.
I remember
was that common, or were your parents exceptional?
I think it was back then. And today it's everything else but common, but we had 2 newspapers delivered to our door every morning. And I remember there were certain events like when the Prime Minister of Sweden, Olof Palme, he was shot and killed, late 90s. Then my father came in to the bedroom where my mom was still sleeping, and I could tell from a part I had just, my room next to theirs, and I could tell that he woke up to tell that he had been shot and killed. Because back then, these things were big news because news didn't travel fast.
Yeah.
And today, I don't believe that there are more things going on in the world. But with social medias and the way that we're getting all our news pieces from one electronic device or another, the world has just become bigger because now the news from Sri Lanka
Travels quickly. There's,
Yeah.
there's an element of that. But going back to you not agreeing to Sophia going out as you did when she's 12 years old, we're seeing knife crime in London. And London, the streets of London, I've known a long time. We've never had knife crime like this. There is a lot more of it. Do you get that sort of problem at home in Denmark, or is always get the impression Denmark's quite a safe country?
It is.
Quite
It
a
is.
law-abiding country.
Yeah, it is, definitely. I would say that we're a population of approximately 6 million people.
60% the size of London,
Yeah,
3 times the size
Yeah.
of Manchester.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say that averagely we probably have like 50 murders a year. That's it. And out of these 50 people being killed, I'm not, but my guessing is that out of these 50 people, 30 people will probably have been the victims of a jealous husband. Not
I thought you were
accepting.
going to say gang warfare.
No,
a
but
jealous
that
husband.
would be the rest
So is
of it.
infidelity high in Denmark?
No, not more than anywhere else. But it's just to
That's
say
gonna be lower
that
than France.
the highest reason for crimes or murder being committed.
It's
that is
family
jealousy.
murder.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
People who know each other one way or another beforehand, and the likelihood of being attacked in the street, being killed, and so on, it is more or less equal to nothing.
Right.
And that creates a safe environment when you don't have these, high crime rates, or at least when you have crimes, you can allocate them to gangs, jealous husbands, and so on. And I have never, as an adult, been thinking about walking down the street. Being a father, Sophia is not going to walk down the street till she's 37, as we
37.
agreed on. But that's the part of being a father. But would I fear for her walking down the street? No. And I cherish it very much, and especially after having become a father, I have given up all dreams about living in New York, where I was actually planning on going before having Sophia.
Well,
Because it's a safe environment.
I was going to
that's
say that
important today.
you travel the world a lot. You've been to a lot of places. Do you ever just get into a city and feel more comfortable than another city, or less comfortable than just sort of something in the air? Do you ever experience that?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
When I was living here in London back in 94, 95, I loved London, but there were a lot of areas and parts of the city where I wouldn't want to go.
Such
For,
as?
for 2 reasons. No, but I spent back then a lot of time in Kilburn, and because
Large
back-
Irish contingent, yeah.
we couldn't afford staying in other places like that, and I believe it was called Wilston Green and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And they seemed back then in the mid 90s to be rough places, and there were also places around, not far from Soho, that I wouldn't want to go back then. But when I'm coming back to London now, and it was not only because, I had a sense that something could go wrong here. It was also because, back then, the city was much more dirtier than it is today. When I come to London today, I really feel, wow, this is a place where I want to be. On a rainy day like this, I walk around the streets dreaming about coming back in July with a bit of sun and warmth, but I just have a good feeling about being here. And as you said, I've traveled all around the world, and I've also experienced a lot of other places where I have touched down and 10 minutes later felt, okay, I don't need to come back here. When you travel the world, you easily or quickly get a sense how a human life is being valued in this place. And I think they're very fortunate in Europe that you rank a human life very high. Whereas I've been in parts of, as an example, Asia, where it's a completely different thing. I've been a couple of times to South America as well, and I remember when I went to Venezuela a few years back, I immediately had the feeling that, you know, when my job was done, I was going to go.
You wanted to get out of it, yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned New York. Let's go back to New York a bit. New York pre-Giuliani and post-Giuliani, because he cleaned it up a lot, didn't he?
Yep.
He cleaned it up in attitude, as well as, and of course 9/11 came on the end of it, as well as physically cleaning the streets. I get the impression the whole of Scandinavia is a physically clean place. How important do you think that is to creating an environment?
It means a lot. And it also means a lot if you go to places that are anything else but clean, if you go into what's known as ghettos.
Do you have many ghettos in Denmark?
We have some, but again, these are places where I would not fear going, because it's not places where people they are getting, you know, necessarily beaten, stabbed, or shot. They are more ghettos in the way that people live in there. They have a background that perhaps does not allow them to have a job, and if you don't have a job, you don't have any money, and if you don't have any money, you don't have any possibilities, or you have less possibilities when it comes to, you know, culture, spare time, and so on. So they're ghettos for these reasons.
But also people in the ghettos, it takes me back to the Crays and the Richardsons in post-war Britain. People in the ghettos don't want to do things that will attract the attention of the police, because then they'll come looking, then they'll turn things over, then who knows what they'll find. So yeah. So I've read that as a kid you, a lot of kids are like this, but they don't keep it up, fascinated with telling stories. Did that get you into trouble? Did people think you were spinning a yarn?
No.
Oh, you were just telling good stories.
Oh, only good stories.
Only good stories. So,
and since it were stories,
yeah.
kids' stories, nobody would know if they were true.
Ah, clever.
No, but I love telling stories, and you know,
and did you read comics and books and things at a young age? Or?
Books, yes. But what I did when it came to my storytelling was I would constantly write letters.
Right.
And I think that it also continued when I graduated from what's equal to high school and moved to London at the age of 19, 20. My schoolmates, they went to live in Paris or in the States or, you know, traveling around the world. And constantly I remember writing them letters. And I had such a joy of writing these letters, telling stories. You know, if I was walking down Oxford Street,
yeah.
I would turn that into something unique, though that it had just been, you know, regular walk down to
yes.
to Debenhams and
but if
and so on.
If you'd done that today, would you write a letter or would you send an email or one of these other means of communication? There's too many means of communication today. But would you send a letter?
I sent a letter last week.
Good.
Because, you know, my 6-year-old daughter, she has been complaining about that every time we open up the mailbox, it only contains mails for me. What she doesn't realize is that it's bills
for you.
Exactly, and she doesn't want them. But, you know, she complained about this again and again and again. So I actually wrote her a letter and pretending that...
Well, we had a tradition in this country which has died out a lot of sending postcards from holiday. I don't know whether you had that in Denmark, but I make a point of sending the grandchildren postcards.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'm here for a couple of days. I might send them postcards from London.
Yeah.
Just because.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The good thing about having a 6-year-old daughter is, when we last met a couple of weeks ago for the speech at the London Press Club, there was a postcard in the hotel room I was staying in.
Right.
So I filled it out.
And send it off.
Dear beloved Sophia. No, I didn't. Just put it in my suitcase. And then when I came back home, I opened up the mailbox,
Dropped
left
it
it
in.
there without any stamps or anything. But a 6-year-old doesn't look if there's a stamp on the postcard. It just becomes overwhelmed by the fact that it had a postcard.
Got a postcard.
So
That's wonderful.
So I wrote the postcard in London and put it in my suitcase and
Took it with you.
yeah.
So you were into storytelling and letter writing, but you had an ambition to be a journalism.
Yeah, I did, and besides.
When did
Right.
that kick in? How old were you when you thought, I want to be a journalist?
Very young, I would say. And that was also a bit why I mentioned a bit earlier on the part of my parents turning on the radio in the morning as the first thing, getting the newspapers in as the first thing. Because I was brought up in an environment where we constantly listened to the news or read newspapers. And therefore it became a very natural part of my life from a very early age. And I realized later on that the newspaper I would be getting in the morning and reading, always read the sports pages to begin with. I didn't read about, financial stuff, politics and so on. I read about, football players and matches and stuff like that that were coming up. And then all of a sudden I also realized that, the match that was actually on last night, they have a review or resume of that in today's paper. So, I started thinking this could be a way for me to go as well. And
so were you thinking, this gets me into big sport events, I can go for free, I can cover the story, get paid, and enjoy my life?
No, I think that, it was something up here. It would kick off my imagination, telling stories.
Right.
When you tell stories, you can go anywhere in the world and you don't even have to pay for it. So that was what I did. I created stories, and when I was not writing letters or writing down the stories in a diary or just on a piece of paper, I actually ran a quite successful, it was hugely successful, this radio station. And it came out.
So you started your own radio station?
Yes, I did.
How old were you then?
I think I must have been 8, 9, 10 years old. And it was, we never had any single complaints. Perhaps due to the fact that the only listeners was my mom and dad.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
But
I made a record once, we sold 3, mum, dad and one of my grandparents.
So, and I would tape them, these, and I would actually, then put some music in, because that was what was coming on after the news. Then they would put some music in. So I would do the same. And that kicked off the dream of actually doing radio. So when I must have been, also around 21, 22, I started working at a radio station. So all these dreams that I created in my childhood, I went on to fulfill later on in the way that I went into journalism. I had fun with doing radio and so on. And I have always loved reading books. And it has always been something that I would like to do myself, writing a book. And so,
It was a natural development. But you talked about using your imagination. In your current book, The Deprived, of course, there's no imagination. You are dealing in clinical hard fact. Did you find it difficult to make a transition from telling a yarn, spinning a story, which may or may not have some factual basis, into sticking to the facts? Because you or there are delving into something very important.
No, not really. I've been thinking a lot about it, because I'm only 43 years old, and I graduated as a journalist back in 2001, nearly 20 years ago. So I started out with journalism at a very early age.
And that was prompted by the Heysel Stadium
That was when I
disaster?
decided. That is, when I remember, I said to myself, I need to become a journalist. And that was after, I was watching the game at night together with my father. Or we were actually,
This was on television?
it was on
Yeah.
television. We were awaiting the game. And all these, horrible things broke out, leading to, I believe, close to 40 people being
39
killed.
people died,
39, yeah. And I'd never seen anything like it. Naturally, I was in shock. And I remember my parents talking about whether I should watch it on the telly or not. But, we were way too much into it.
Yeah.
Already, it didn't make any sense, shutting it off. So when I went to bed that night, I couldn't wait for the morning papers to arrive,
To read.
to read what had actually happened. And I had such an eager to get out of bed in the morning and read. And
I sense you're eager to get out of bed every morning.
I think I was. I don't,
But
the reality was probably different, but in my own imagination, I was up very early.
But did what you read, and you only saw it on television, so there are angles of cameras and opinions being played out, but did what you read coincide with what you'd actually seen, or did you think there was a difference?
I think that, back then, especially with this event, it was very accurate, because what they portrayed in the newspaper was actually more or less what they had seen on the telly as well. And it's very factual, and the amount of information that you actually have access to at that stage is, tiny. So, the coverage of it might not have been the most enlightening coverage of an event, but it just gave me the feeling and the sense that this is something that you want to do yourself in the future. And I've known since I was like this that I want to become a journalist, and I loved doing journalism from day one when I started out doing it on a more serious base. But going back to your question, if it was difficult for me to swap into writing factual stuff, never. And I think that I was brought up in a very old-fashioned kind of way doing journalism, because to me, journalism is looking into problems of society. And that was how you did a lot of daily newspapers when I started out. It was, more and more people they suffer from, more and more people cannot. It was always twisted in a critical / negative way, the kind of journalism that was mainly being done back then. And, because you had a few radio stations, you had only newspapers and a few TV stations actually. Today it's all booming, you have all kind of stuff.
So do you think
so it has become more positive, I think.
You think it's become more positive? You don't think we've become more sensational
Also,
in order to
but
sell?
my point is, it's not difficult for me to write these books because they look into what I have always been doing, touching base on critical stuff related to society.
Right.
That tends to be easy to me, saying we have 165 Americans who've been wrongfully put on death row. I find it very easy, to transform my brain into a certain way where I can take a good, hard, deep look at this from a
When you say
point.
165 who've been wrongfully put on death row, does that mean they've been pardoned since, which is how you know they're there wrongfully?
I would actually correct myself and say it's believed that 5% of the roughly 2,600
Right.
people on death row are there for crimes they never committed.
By mistake.
The 165 are are the Americans who have been on death row but later exonerated.
Right.
So we know that these 165 Americans,
But
they didn't do it.
some have been exonerated before being executed and therefore lived, others haven't. And in the book you talk about a couple who, one was executed and one wasn't.
Yeah.
Do you want to expand on that?
It was a couple. In the book, I interview Sonny Jacobs, and she went to Florida together with her 10-month-old daughter and 9-year-old son in the back seat to pick up her husband, Jesse. And when she got down there from North Carolina, her car broke down and she needed money wired to get back home before, she had to fix the car and then drive off again.
Had
But
she picked up her husband then?
she was down there when,
Yeah.
when the car broke down. And long story short, her husband Jesse had a friend down there who turned out to be on parole. And they found out when they pulled over to a rest stop in just outside of Fort Lauderdale, and 2 police officers, they did a routine check on this vehicle containing Sonny, her husband Jesse, her 2, her son and her daughter,
Children.
and then this guy who was on parole, the acclaimed friend. And when they did this routine check, they found a gun between Walter Rhodes, as he's called, between his legs. And immediately...
Did that breach his parole?
Yeah, it did. And they found out when they called the dispatch. They drew their guns to arrest him, but he drew his gun as well and ended up killing these 2 officers. And when afterwards he took the other ones hostage and he drew around with them for almost 24 hours.
So he's in their car, he's got a gun, he kills 2 road cops and then takes his friends hostage in an attempt to escape.
Yeah. And the wife of the friend and the kids of
Yeah,
the friend.
the 4 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as they went on, he actually also took an old guy hostage. And all this incident ends...
And are there witnesses to all of this?
Yeah. Because when he took this old guy hostage, Walter Rhodes didn't know that his wife was actually watching from the window. And she immediately afterwards called the police and said, my husband has just been taken hostage and they're driving in his car. So, she could easily give a description of what was going on. And she told,
So
which
they
is an
left in the old guy's car,
Yeah.
not the family car that had broken down and been mended.
They actually left the crime scene in the police car.
Right.
But he wanted to ditch that because, he figured out they're probably...
It's a bit obvious.
Yeah, it's a bit obvious. So that was one of the reasons why he actually took this old guy as a hostage as well. And it all came to an end, which is, quite thoughtful. The police set up a roadblock. And when they approached this roadblock, Walter Rhodes decided to do one thing. Try to avoid it. So, he made a sharp turn, but so close to the roadblock that all the cops there, they got out their guns and they just started firing at the car, despite knowing
There's 2 children
that there
in
were 2 children in it.
And an old boy.
Yeah.
He was a hostage.
Yeah.
Right.
And for some reason, the only one who was hit was actually Walter Rhodes. All of the others, they didn't have a scratch. But when he got into the hotel bed, the hospital bed, he decided to go for, a bargain with the prosecutor, saying that I didn't do it, Jesse did it, and his accomplice was the wife, Sonny Jacobs.
But we had witnesses who saw otherwise.
Not who saw the shooting,
Right.
But when they tested all of them for gunpowder, the only one who had gunpowder on his hands was Walter Rhodes. They even tested the kids for gunpowder to see if they had been in connection with the gun, and nobody had. But you know, he was a regular of the prison system, so he knew how to cut a deal.
But he had to get past the jury, didn't he? You know, if there's three of us in the room with a cameraman, that one of us fires a gun, the other two have got no powder on our hands, or on their hands. How can you convict them?
Now we're talking about some of the flaws of the US justice system. And in this case, it seems fair to say that the prosecutor was so eager on getting a conviction that he forgot to tell that they even did a polygraph test on Walter Rhodes, and he didn't pass. That he was the only one with gunpowder. And one of the reasons why Sonny was later exonerated was because it turns out that at the same time she was arrested, a 19, 20-year-old young lady was as well. She was a college student, and she was arrested for, you know, having, you know, I think marijuana or some kind of, you know, minor drugs on her. And they said, you know, if you actually testify that Sonny confessed to you to having killed these two cops, then we'll let you off the hook and let you go.
Charge.
Sorry?
So they let her off the charge.
Yeah.
The evidence appears not to be
Yeah.
the most important thing here.
But you know, later, as happened in many of these cases, people who have given false testimonies, they come around. Perhaps
So what
5
got
years
you
later,
into
20
this
years
specific story? Because there's
Because she was the
165
first-
you could have picked up.
Because when Sonny was convicted, she was the only woman on death row in America. And I wanted to portray in my book what it's like to be a woman on death row, because normally we hear about men.
Yeah.
And therefore, because, you know, only a few women being put there compared to the amount of, or the number of men, it was fairly easy finding Sonny and listening, you know, to a story and putting it into the book. So that was how I got in touch with Sonny.
So you pulled it all together around that, but she wasn't executed.
No.
How was she discovered as innocent?
Because, as an example, they did a lot of, you know, investigation of her background. A friend of hers called Mickey Dickoff, which is a movie maker, filmmaker, and she actually looked into her case. And she found out while investigating the background and so on that there was no possibility of Sonny being the killer. And they came forward with the investigations they did, and they even came forward with this young lady who had given this false testimony. She would now come around and say,
How many years had gone past it?
till she was convicted till she was released, it was 17 years.
17 years.
Yes, he was executed a few years before she was exonerated.
Why weren't they executed together?
Because first of all, after 5 years on death row, now we're getting into technicalities.
Right.
But after 5 years of being on death row, Sonny was actually put into popular prison because her conviction was overturned to life imprisonment. And it was due to a technicality that happened during the trial, because she was not convicted by the jury going to death row, but the judge, he overturned the verdict of the jury and said, I'm actually going to put her on death row despite the fact you only say she's going to get life imprisonment. And he was actually not allowed to do that. And therefore later they had to overturn.
It took years to discover that the judge had actually exceeded his authority. How was that? How did that happen?
It didn't take years to discover it, but it took years before it was actually accepted
Right.
that he did it. And remember, Sonny was convicted as the accomplice of her
Right.
husband Jesse. So when Jesse was on trial, it lasted 4 days, and the jury said death row. So he remained on death row when she had her conviction overturned because of this,
Yeah.
should we call it technicality. And since he was convicted of having killed 2 police officers, allegedly they made him even suffer in death because the electric chair was not functioning as it should when he was executed. So it took almost 20 minutes for him to die in the electrical chair.
And it would normally take how long?
A few minutes.
Instantly. Yeah.
You know, varies from person to person, but you know, it didn't function as it should. So he caught fire several times and so on, because they really, you know, allegedly wanted him.
And was there any
to suffer.
investigation into that? Was it ever followed up?
I do not think so, but afterwards, when, you know, he was actually exonerated in death as well, or proven innocent after death. There were some of the people working in the prison who, as I understand from Sonny, told her that deliberately they made him suffer even more than he was supposed to.
Right.
And you can say, in my opinion, what a cruelty when we know today that the guy they made suffer severely in that electrical chair was actually an innocent father.
So where does that leave you on the question of death penalty? I mean, some states have it, some don't. Some countries have it, some we don't currently, or not for a long time. Where do you feel? Do you believe in capital punishment?
No, absolutely not. And it's important for me to say, because when I say that, especially to Americans, they think, oh, if you're not in favor of the death penalty, you must be very soft on crime. I do believe that if people, they do these heinous crimes, they should be punished. And they should also feel that life in prison is not a life you want for yourself. But putting a person behind bars, whether you do it for 5, 10 or 50 years, is a huge difference to putting him or her in the electric chair. Because you can get the innocent man out of his cell, but not out of his grave. And with 165 people exonerated who were meant to be executed, that shows us that
it shows a doubt. But let's paint 2 different scenarios, Steffen. We go to the pub one night, we have too much to drink, we start arguing with ourselves and other people, and one of us swings a punch and kills somebody. That was unfortunate. It's not the best word in the world, but it was unfortunate. There was no intention. You go into a bank with a sawn-off shotgun to steal money, point the gun at somebody, and when they won't give you the money, you pull the trigger and blow their head off. 2 totally different scenarios. In the second one, where we haven't got much dispute as to fact, do you think the death penalty is justified?
But there's one thing, you know, pardon my French, but that example, which is always being used, is so banal. Because you must remember one thing. These 165 people who've been exonerated from death row, they were just as guilty of these murders as the guy walking into the bank and shooting and killing another person, knowing what he did. They were just as guilty in the public eye until proven
clear fact. Let's accept that it's clear fact that they might even admit it.
Yeah.
They could be caught on CCTV. It has always seemed to me that there actually is a need for 2 rules. Cold-blooded, premeditated murder is different to having a punch up in a pub or something.
But the cold-blooded murder, in all cases, until proven innocent later, you can't, put a person on death row saying, you're going there, and you might be going there or not, or you might be executed or not, because we might be a bit in doubt whether you're actually guilty or not. If a person is put...
So if there's doubt, you err on the side of caution.
But there's one thing that's important to remember. If there's doubt,
yeah,
there's no conviction. You only convict people
with
that you can...
certainty. Yeah.
So if there's any doubt, you can convict the person. So, getting into this, he really did it, there's no doubt. Well, you have to say that about everyone that you
Right.
put in prison. You can't say he probably
because
did it.
they were
Yeah.
found
So,
guilty.
that is an argument, a point of view that's always being put forward when you discuss the death penalty. Should we really have death penalty for the people who did it? And then the other ones, will just
Well,
put them...
that's right.
It doesn't work that way. It's either or.
Talking about murder and death, you, I imagine, were undercover as a reporter in Serbia, and somebody put a gun to your head.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us what happened.
That was actually when I was starting out as a journalist, when I was graduating.
So you were sort of 20 years old when this happened?
I must have been, around 25.
Right.
And I was, looking into human trafficking. This was in the beginning of 2001. I went to the Balkans because it was a huge mess just after the Civil War.
Yeah.
And, no law and order or anything. And if you have an area with no law and order, you have a lot of criminals.
Yes.
And they found out that the easiest way to get illegal immigrants into Europe from Turkey or wherever they came from would be through the route of the Balkans. So I went to Serbia, and I knew that there was a neighborhood where it was mainly Chinese illegal immigrants staying, working, and waiting to be brought into from journalistic investigations, but also
Right.
actually from a report that I read the European Union had put out, because nobody knew much about human trafficking back then, but the European Union knew this is going to be a huge problem to Europe if we don't do anything about it. So I've read this report stating that there was thousands and thousands and thousands of Chinese illegal immigrants staying. And it was correct. I went out there with a colleague, and we got split. We were working in different directions, trying to get some of these illegal immigrants to talk with us. And as I was walking around this mall around noon, this guy came up from behind very, very fast and swift and without making any sounds. And next minute he had me in a chokehold, and he was pointing a gun.
This is in the middle of a crowded shopping centre.
Yeah.
He's obviously a pro.
Yeah, with mainly, Chinese illegal immigrants there.
Right.
So, they were not the first ones
They're not gonna go,
to
yeah,
raise their
that's-
hand
yeah,
and was saying, oh, something is going on here. That's not supposed to. So, he grabbed me and he just put the gun against my head and said, shut up, come with me, and dragged off with me.
So you did.
And so I did, and
And what was going through your head at that point? Because despite what you said about the shopping centre, you were probably safer in a crowd than on your own.
Yeah, but talking of as we walked down a dirt road, there were a few thoughts going through my mind. One of them was, first, please don't tremble or anything like that, because then the gun might go off. And it was pressed. I felt the pain of the gun being pressed against my timber.
But you didn't have a hood over your head or anything. You could
nothing
you
at all.
See,
you
could see him.
like
Right.
this.
Yeah.
And then we walked off quite rapidly because, you don't wander around listening to the birds singing
No.
if you got a guy like this and you're not supposed to. So we walked off, and he confronted me with the stuff that I was doing, that, it would probably be safer for me
Did
not
you have
looking
notes
into.
or films or discs on you that he took or anything?
Yeah, it took my camera, but back then, we didn't have any cell phones that you would use for
Right.
for taking photos as we do today. It was a regular camera back then. Back then, he took my watch and so on. But walking down that dirt road, I also felt extremely alone. Though it just lasted for perhaps, you lose kind of.
So fear didn't kick in, it was loneliness.
But with the loneliness probably coming from the fear.
Right.
Because, I was so scared that he was going to shoot me that I just wanted someone to be there with me.
Someone to
It
hold
didn't
your
matter.
hand.
Someone to hold my hand. It didn't matter who it was. I just didn't want to be alone in that situation. And
What an
I found
incredible
out.
emotion to have in that situation.
Absolutely. But at a early stage in life, I found out that we can be, super egoistic. We can be, strong individuals. We can get through life on our own. But when it's time to say goodbye, or when you fear saying goodbye, I realized that in that time and moment, you just don't want to be alone. And to me, it makes great sense that when you see a person, and I would say, thank God you're not seeing this in everyday life, in real life, in the streets, but when you see a movie and they portray the guy being run over by a car and someone holding his or her hand, that makes enormous sense to me, because the last thing they want to be in that moment is alone. And who's holding your hand is less important, as long as there's someone there to hold it.
Feeling of loneliness the result of a different sort of fear? You're afraid because you think a bloke might shoot you dead, but you're lonely. Is that second fear because you don't know what's going to happen? Is there a God? Isn't there a God? Whether you're a believer or a disbeliever, it doesn't matter. Is that loneliness caused by this secondary fear?
I think, plain and simple, this loneliness is based on something that's probably very human.
Well, we're
not
human beings, and
Yeah.
all too often we abbreviate it to human, and we actually forget the word being, which is what we are. We're beings, and that, I think, is what you're saying. That
But you
we
can
are
have-
beings.
Yeah, but you can have experiences in your life where you know that life is actually not about being alone. But it might take you 85 years to realize
I'm getting
that.
closer.
But at that time and moment, I'm sure you would like to have someone around you that loves you, or at least,
Yeah.
if that is not possible because of the given facts of circumstances, then you might want just someone passing by in the
Just to
street
be there.
to sit down and to be there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be as dramatic as concerning life or death. If you have an accident, we also want someone to be
The
there,
comfort.
helping
Yeah.
us out, to comfort,
Yeah,
and because what other people can do is actually they can put hope in you when you feel hopeless yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
And I also probably felt when I was being dragged off by this guy, that if there was someone else there, then he's probably not going to shoot me. So that went through my head, and it has actually, this feeling so many years back has actually also bred the next book that I'm going to put out. Without telling too much, about it, but it's going to be out in early fall this year. It is actually a number of people I've interviewed as well who have experienced having loved ones abducted, and the reason why is that I put out or decided to do this book was one of the reasons, but the main reason was, if you are 7 years old on your way home from school in America and you're abducted, you must feel extremely lonely. One thing is how you go about it as an adult, trying to act logical about it, but what if you are a kid?
Sophia's almost 7. I've got grandchildren of 7. Is this something you talk to them about?
To my daughter?
Yeah.
No.
No.
No. What have done is naturally, and people would say that's probably, you know, a bit strange to do, but you know, a work hazard. I have spoken to Sophia about what would be a good way to react if someone should actually approach her. Because you know, there are certain ways that you can act as a child, and you know, thank God, and even in America, a child being abducted by a stranger is extremely rare.
Oh, it's rare.
Yeah.
And it's heinous is a
Yeah.
word the Americans
Yeah.
use. It
Yeah.
is, yeah. Yeah, it is rare.
But you know, it's not.
So you've been interviewing these people, which is going to be the book. Are you telling your own story in one of the chapters?
I'm actually telling about the incident in Serbia.
Yeah.
As the reason why I'm writing this book, because I like to use myself in my work, and also do it in the deprived, innocent, and death row, because I actually used to be in favor of the death penalty. Because when I was 17 years old, I was on my way home late one night, and in front of me, I would say probably 100 meters in front of me, and all of a sudden, I saw this group of guys attacking 2 young men, and they ended up stabbing one of these young men to death. And that was the first time in my life I was really, really scared.
Well,
Because
that's not an experience that any of us have had. How were you in a situation where you could be somewhere that happened?
by coincidence,
Right.
I
I mean,
was on
London's pretty heavy on crime at the moment, but
Yeah.
I haven't yet.
But
late at
you know,
night or
I
any
was
other
there
time.
by a coincidence.
Right.
And this young man, I believe that he was 21, 22, that was stabbed to death, he was there by coincidence as well. What happened was he was passing by a young guy that this group of thugs were harassing. So he approached them, asking them to leave this young guy be. But instead of doing that, they turned their back on him and attacked this friendly young man who just tried to intervene.
Right.
And they stabbed him to death. So from he passed by a minute or two
So
before
you're
I
100
did.
yards, 4 or 5 cricket pitches away. By the time you get there, they've all fled, presumably.
They did. And you know, when I came there, which was, you know, a bit further up the street, I remember that there was blood everywhere, and there were actually other people that they had also stabbed on the way away
Was
from
this
them.
in the
so
days
on.
of mobile phones, or were you not able to summon an ambulance? And
This was, you know, the mobile phone was, you know, just
right,
starting to come around.
it
so
was
to
a
speak.
brick, and not many
Yeah,
people
yeah.
have one.
Exactly. So when I saw that, I was really, really scared for many years to come. And it was actually humiliating because I was 17 years old and I did not dare to sleep alone in my room.
This was in Denmark,
This was in Denmark.
right?
And again, it's very rare to, you know.
Where they have low crime,
Yeah,
low murders. Were the guys caught?
Yes, they were.
Right.
And it turned out that it was a group I think they were actually from Thailand or Vietnam, living in Denmark, and they actually went to the same karate club, and they just decided that night to practice karate out in the real world on innocent people.
With a knife.
And it turned out, it escalated into, them using knives and so on. But they were caught right away and locked up. But I was scared for years. And this fear that they put in me, I acted on it as you would often do to fear. You try to avoid your own fear by creating anger. And my anger was created in the way that I was thinking, if you have been able to take a life, you must pay with your own life. So if you had asked me back then if I was in favor of the death penalty, I would have said yes, give it to them. They took a young innocent man's life, now they have to pay with their own. But that is the way that you automatically often respond to your own fear, because it's difficult to deal with your fear. Instead, you react instinctively to it. And I did back then, and my instinct was, I get rid of my fear by getting rid of the people who put it in
that was
me.
the old USSR tactic with countries, wasn't it? Push it over the border, make them more afraid, so we feel safe. But had you changed your view on the capital punishment before you were dragged out into the dirt in Serbia with the gun to your head? Or
I didn't have, I didn't have any, really occasions to think about it. But I would say if this guy had done something,
if he'd shot you, would you have been in favour of him being executed?
Ask me today.
No, today is
But
no. When the kids were messing around and stabbed somebody, the answer was yes. I'm wondering where you were when you experienced...
Back then, I probably would. But
right.
Back then, I had not become aware of all the innocent people on death row.
Because to me, that makes it more valid that having had that experience, and thankfully survived it, you then come to view that if you hadn't survived it, you actually wouldn't have wanted the perpetrators executed. That's interesting. So the guy let you go. Did he just say, well, on your way?
No, what happened was, he very, made the message clear. Stop doing what you're doing here.
Right.
Leave, or you're going to pay. And then they took all that had a value, camera, watch, and so on, and just left.
Did they take a hotel room key? I was thinking they'd go around and raid the room.
No, they didn't. And this was, outside of Serbia, they wouldn't know where to go.
Right.
I think that they were just, interested in intimidating us and, then taking off. Because what happened was they took off with me, and later they called my colleague who was at another place at the mall, and they came down with him, but in a more friendly way, because one of these other people related to the human trafficking said, if you don't come along now, we're going to kill your friend or your colleague. And what we did was we went directly back, and I was so scared. We went directly back to a police station, reported what had happened. And they made us look, I remember, at all sorts of photos. And that was a really intimidating experience as well, because you look at photos of people and you say to yourself, it's not possible that a human being can look this evil. And you really find out when you go over these...
Did you think the police were genuine? I remember being in a bar in Gdansk 20 odd years ago, where there was a charge let off with some warning, which was the protection racket. And I rather stupidly said to the bloke who owned the bar, what are the police doing about it? And he said, the police are running the protection racket.
Yeah.
Did you think that was happening in Serbia, that they were in on it? Or were they, as we like to believe, the British, Danish police are legit?
I would say that parts of the police in Serbia was back then definitely involved with human trafficking.
Right.
Because afterwards we went to Bosnia, and there the United Nations suspected even highly placed, positioned Bosnian politicians to be part of the human trafficking as well. Remember, this was in 2001, 2 years after that the NATO bombed and forced Serbia to give up all hopes of continuing the civil war. So when I came as a Dane into the police station saying, I would like to report something, a crime that has been committed against me, and they found out that I was Danish, a part of the NATO, they really didn't care.
And a reporter.
And a reporter, they didn't care.
Yeah.
And we went home, I contacted the Danish embassy, and they said, we need to get you out of here immediately. And I said, no, you can get me out of here in a few weeks' time, because I also need to go to Bosnia and investigate human trafficking there.
So you finished the investigation. They didn't come after you again. When and where did you publish it?
In the largest Danish newspaper. But this was actually the assignment that I had to turn in for graduating at the School of Journalism. And
Did you choose your assignment, or did they say, we want you to go? I mean,
I chose it myself.
You chose it?
Yeah. But you know, this was a kind of, journalism was very much a lifestyle to me.
Right.
And back then in 2001, I imagined that I was going to go out and be the best reporter in the world, covering the worst catastrophes in the world and so on. That was,
you were going to uncover the next Watergate and
stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you know, I was so set on that goal that I would do anything to fulfill it. And I remember I had something to prove with this assignment, because I remember saying a few months earlier, when I turned this report in, this special assignment that's actually going to be my graduation, I want the highest mark possible for it. And I was so eager.
Did you get it?
Yes, I did.
Right.
And you know, people, they were laughing at me saying, you know, we had a scale going from 0.3 till 13. 13 was the best mark you could get. And you know, it was given very rarely for an outstanding assignment, stuff like that. And I said, I want 13.
I want 13.
And people, they laughed and said, you can't say that. It can go in so many different directions.
Two things that come into
So
my
I had
head
something to prove.
Would you say you are a driven person? Something to prove? Is the challenge and beating the challenge actually more important than what you're doing?
No, today I'm driven by passion.
Right.
And I'm driven by passion in the way that what I do needs to make sense to me and others as well. Because the unfortunate thing was, when I graduated, on the very same day as I walked out from the auditorium where we were having the ceremony, the editor-in-chief of the largest daily newspaper, he was waiting outside, and he said to me, if I was a young, skilled, talented guy like you, I would go back home now and I would put together a bid for actually offering to produce part of our newspaper. The costs of, you know, wages for journalists and the production costs were starting to get so high that they couldn't be financed by the average sale of advertorials and you know, just people actually paying for the newspaper, because people, they paid for the newspaper back then. So
still
I went
do
back
sometimes
home.
in
Still
this
do,
country.
and we should more often.
Some are free, some
because
are
you
not.
know, money and
ongoing
quality
debate,
goes together. But I went home, and this was in June of 2001, and by the 1st of December, I had actually made a contract with the largest daily newspaper in Denmark to having them outsourcing parts of their production. And I had never ever had a real job before. I just came from graduating, and in all of a sudden I was the boss of a company working with newspapers. We were the first company in Denmark that would actually offer newspapers to, conduct assignments that they had outsourced. And we produced within the first year thousands and thousands and thousands of newspaper articles. And we produced on a daily basis. And I had gone from being, just a student to, I think that within the first year, I was probably employing 20 staff people.
And are you still doing that?
I'm still doing that. And today, I have decided to do it in another way. Back then, we would get in assignments from all major newspapers in Denmark. And we would have staff sitting in, at a time, 4 different cities in Denmark. And still, I was in my 20s, and I was, going from being a journalist to being a businessman. But, after some years, I decided I don't want to be a businessman only. Because, what I set out to do as a young boy and later as a young man was, doing journalism, writing stories. So yes, today, my company still works with medias. We still produce documentaries. We still produce corporate movies and stuff like that. But the only reason why I'm doing that is because it allows me, from a financial point of view, taking weeks, months out of the calendar, going to the States, writing these
books like this.
And it also helps me finance another very interesting project that I've been working on for many years. I've been following the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan in America. They're different, there's several Grand Dragons, but he's the Grand Dragon of one certain state. And I've been following him for a number of years.
Does he know this?
Yes, of course he does.
So you're not stalking him, you're
we're invited
tracking. You're invited in.
Yeah, we're spending time with him, with his family, in his home. And we also go to places where they're actually, for some reason, allowing us in to film what they call the Ku Klux Klan, but which is also a mixture of skinheads, neo-Nazis, what could also be called
so
the
why are they letting you in?
There are 2 reasons for that. The first reason is it doesn't seem as dangerous letting a Danish guy in as it would be if he flew out of Los Angeles or New York. But also think that, and it might sound a bit, like I have high thoughts about myself, but I think that one of my strongest forces as a journalist, as an author or documentary maker, is that I have an ability to talk to people and actually having them trust in me. Because the most important thing when you do this kind of stuff, these assignments, these books,
they need to feel comfortable.
They need to feel comfortable around you, but you also need to be honest with them, saying, this is what I'm actually planning on doing. You have the opportunity of saying no. And if you actually do it in the same way, saying, I do not agree with you. And naturally my documentary is going to portray that the Ku Klux Klan is not a bunch of nice guys, because we film you while you're creating bombs, while you're shooting machine guns and so on, because you're preparing for what you call a holy war.
Do you feel an obligation to grasp on what you're seeing to prevent the use of the bomb and possibly save life?
Concerning my own life.
Not your life, but lives that you film somebody making a bomb. I don't know what they're going to do with it. Maybe they're going to put it on a bus or take it to a shopping centre or somewhere. Do you feel an obligation to go around the local police station and say, knock on number 27, they're making a bomb?
No, because, that would violate all ethics standards of good journalism. And a very concrete example of that is, while I was filming the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, he was arrested. And he was put in jail. And when he was put in jail, the FBI started going through his stuff. And on his computer they found footage of him shooting guns. He has, prior to this conviction that he just had 2 years ago. He has also been convicted and spent 4 years in jail, in prison, for a hate crime that he committed against a state trooper. And this means that as a felon, he can by no means be near guns, but he was. And when the FBI found out, they actually called me in for questioning. And I was being interviewed by the FBI because they want to find out if it was correct that I had been providing the Ku Klux Klan with guns. He explained that was why he had these guns in his belongings. We were producing a documentary,
so
and we
blamed
wanted
you.
him.
But let's personalize it a little bit.
But going back to your question,
Yeah.
my point is, naturally, I denied right away that I had anything to do with this. But when the FBI asked if I was going to provide them with footage of the Ku Klux Klan, I would have to say, no, that is not my job to hand you the evidence. My job is to protect my sources until this material is published. Because, if they were saying we're going to go and bomb a place, the first thing I would do was get down and tell the FBI they're planning on this, because then you have an obligation to.
So they're going to bomb the number 27 bus. You go and tell somebody.
Absolutely.
When you just know that they are making the tools to bomb anything, you think you keep quiet. You wait until later.
Then we need to portray the documentary and good journalism about this, because if they let us in and they say we're producing bombs, if you as a reporter cannot go there and actually factually document that, how on earth are we then going to create awareness, debate, etc. about what's going on within these hate groups and so on? Then you can be sure that it would be completely sealed down, and there was no reporter ever getting behind that door, and then nobody would know what was going on. So, and I am dead sure that the FBI and other authorities, they know already what's going on with these militia groups and so on.
They have good insight.
But if I should become aware of a crime about to take place, then it would be my obligation first and foremost as a human being.
So if it's specific
it.
obligation, if it's general and vague, it's part of producing the documentary. How would you react to being a vicar it's the Catholic Church, have confession, isn't it? And hearing of a crime to be committed against somebody's life, would you feel obliged to? You'd obviously try and persuade them not to, but if that failed, would you feel obliged to act?
Yes, if it was something about to happen.
Yeah.
But I guess that the way that they see it when they take these confessions is, if we ran off to the police or someone else telling Mr. Smith did this and this,
They'd never get another
back.
confession, yeah.
No, and they would also be prevented of the possibility of actually saying, Mr. Smith, 15 years back, you did this. How can we actually make sure you're not going to repeat it 15 years from now? So, but naturally, no matter what you are, if you are a doctor, if you're a priest, if you're a journalist, if you know that people's lives are in danger, it is, as I said before, not your obligation as one of these things. It's your obligation as a human being.
As a human being.
To protect and save the life of others.
Well, it's been fascinating, Steffen, and we are coming to the end. You were held at gunpoint, told to stop doing what you were doing, walked off, brushed yourself down and carried on. You were a young man, you were single. If you had been married, would you have carried on? You now have a nearly 7-year-old daughter. If it happened today, would you have taken the warning or would you carry on?
The heroic answer would be saying that I would carry on.
Why would that be heroic?
Because for the greater good. Because, you know,
Right.
when you write about human trafficking, or at least the reason why I'm doing it, is because I think it's so awful what's happening
Yeah.
to these people who are forced into it and so on. And it's the same thing with my book about innocent Americans on death row. This is about giving the people who haven't got a voice.
Right.
Helping people out who needs help because they don't have the resources to help themselves. So that is why I think it's important looking into human trafficking. You know, there's only one crime today that the criminals make more money from. That's drugs. You know, the other thing is selling people. Modern day slavery. I think it really needs to be told by people who actually dare to go in and go behind the lines, so to speak, and meet these illegal
So would you do it
immigrants.
today?
Today, I would definitely go back right away if someone had put a gun to my head.
Right.
But what before that? Would I say, this topic is too dangerous covering, so I won't do it? But I do believe that it's really important looking into human trafficking. It is such a horrible thing that's being committed against people who are forced into human trafficking, because human trafficking is often also related to sex trafficking, happening right outside these doors. So, you know, someone needs to go and investigate what this is actually about in order to help the victims. It's the same thing when you look into, for instance, the white supremacy movement. What is it that's conflicting within the American society, leading to people perhaps on the both sides not being able to talk? And to me, it's all about actually giving the victims of various crimes a voice. Also the people who are innocent on death row. Because if you and I, people with resources, if we do not help the ones who doesn't have any resources, what will become of them? And we're back to that I'm driven by passion about these things, but also because one of the things leading to this passion is I believe it's important. And for so many years, so far, most of my career has been about myself, getting for myself, creating for myself. Today, though I'm only 43 years old, it gives me value that I actually do something that gives back to other people. It makes me much happier, and you know, it also relieves me of always having to think about, oh, you need to make money enough to pay for your rent and so on, because you're so overwhelmed with the work that you do because you feel so thrilled about it, and you think it's so important that you can't leave it be. And that is what drives me today. And yeah, it does make me happy and proud when I read on social media people who've been innocent on death row, and I might not even know them, that they believe that this book is helping both them and not least people who are there. And that's important to me, and I think that is what good journalism is also about. It is about giving a voice to the people who need it. And it doesn't have to be drastic in the way that it's human trafficking, that it's innocent people on death row. It is also a question about more and more Danes, as I started out by saying, who might not be able to, you know, stay in their homes because the authorities, they didn't care when they allowed big industry to set up a huge factory, polluting it all now, and so on. You know, that can also be a way of giving people a voice when they need it.
So it is a passion, it is a mission. It's been a fascinating conversation. We've gone on longer than we expected. We could go on for days, but we did that once before. Well, not for days, but for longer than expected. Your current book is The Deprived, which talks about people wrongly on death row. Your new book is coming out in the autumn this year. We look forward to that. You've teased us a little bit. I'm getting very much a sense here that you have reached self-actualization in Maslow's pyramid. It's something I can say I've personally experienced, but not at 43 years old. I was a great deal older. Steffen, thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you for joining us on As You See Yourselves. And as you see, Steffen sees himself doing good through investigative journalism. Thank you for being with us.